I want to tell you about a new podcast called Amuse News. Publishing multiple days a week, Amuse News is your source for food news, interviews from around the food world, and more. On the show, we'll be engaging with food storytellers, from chefs to advocates to people working in the field, and many more. Find Amuse News wherever you get your podcasts. Amuse News is a destination for everyone who's looking for a new, insightful look into the world of food.
Today's program has been brought to you by Heritage Foods USA, the nation's largest distributor of heritage breed pigs and turkeys. For more information, visit heritagefoodsusa.com.
I'm Dave Arnold, host of Cooking Issues. You're listening to Heritage Radio Network, broadcasting live from Bushwick, Brooklyn. If you like this program, visit heritageradionetwork.org for thousands more.
All right. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Heritage Radio Network. We are coming to you, as always, live from the back of Roberta's Pizza here in Bushwick, Brooklyn. And you're listening to the Farm Report. I'm your host, Erin Fairbanks, and we are in the midst here in New York City of Cider Week. Cider Week jumped off October 24th and is with us to November 2nd, so we thought it would be excellent to bring back I guess we've had on the studio a bunch of times, and it's really exciting to chat with you again here on the Farm Report. We're joined by Steve Wood of Property Lane Orchards and Farnum Hills Cider. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me.
So how is your cider week going so far?
It's great. I mean, it's chaotic. I mean, the whole thing is a little strange. Right? Some of us were over in Turin, in Torino, in Italy, at the slow food thing. All you folks think that it's a good idea to celebrate all the things that we grow in the fall when we're all in the middle of a harvest. So we're scrambling all over the place, we and other growers, to say hello to everybody while we should actually be picking the crop that everybody wants so much to praise. But we're here and it's going great. We've seen all sorts of interested people and seen a real rise in interest in cider, which is extremely exciting. So it's cool.
Yeah, it's awesome.
I like New York.
I guess that's what would qualify as a good problem.
No, it is a good. Indeed, it is a good problem. It is a good problem. I'm not whining. I'm just amused by the fact that so many people at so many farms are not at their farms because they're busy doing this stuff. But it is totally full. It's the difference between this New York now and New York 5 years ago with cider is or even 2 years ago. It's extraordinary. It's really cool.
Well, I know. I want to kind of jump into some deeper topics a little later in the show, but I want to, as quickly as we can, kind of go through some apple basics for folks. Really, just kind of like the broad strokes primer, and kind of a couple of questions I'm hoping you can enlighten our listeners on briefly. Is giving us a sense of an apple orchard. Kind of how long does it take a tree to bear fruit? What's kind of the size of your orchard? And if you can talk a little bit about the types of apples that you grow, because I think that is, an interesting part of your farm's history and obviously a big part of the cider conversation.
Sure. Well, I've been growing apples for my sins at the same farm since 1965. So it is a little bit like a heroin addiction, I guess. But we were grower packer shippers of McIntosh, Cortland, all kinds of regular market varieties, and by various happy, I guess now I can say, circumstances, we shifted over in the 80s to we started experimenting with a bunch of cider apples from around the world and a bunch of other heirloom varieties that are actually good for cooking and eating from around the world, and grafted several hundred varieties during those years in the early 80s, just sort of to see whether we could grow them whether they could be grown to a high standard in our growing conditions, which are very different from, say, the north of France or the west of England. And we discovered, for the most part, that what we suspected was true, that most things grown well in other parts of the world we couldn't grow very well. But we did discover a handful of varieties that we could grow beautifully. And then one thing sort of led to another. We've got about 100 acres of orchard ground on a bunch of quite a lot more wooded land. It's a condition of all northern New England farms that finding 100 acres of fields takes a lot of land to make. But we shifted because of various conditions in the actual apple market. We decided in the 80s to just take a flyer and to take out acres and acres of good eating apples and plant a bunch of inedible varieties that nobody in this country had ever heard of. And that was the beginning of our whole cider business. So we grow varieties like, I don't know, names that people are not familiar with: Dabinet, Chiseled Jersey, Yarlington Mill, Medaille d'Or, Calvillo Blanc d'Hiver, the Soba Spitzenberg. I mean, some of the last couple, the Calvillo Blanc d'Hiver is a brilliant cooking apple, beautiful culinary apple, and very old French, obviously French. Spitzenberg is an American apple from Ulster County, New York, probably mid-18th century Providence. We've just selected things that we think are really good, either for cider or for eating and cooking or for both, that we can grow really well up there. And so we've got a kind of a weird orchard of a lot of inedible fruit.
Yeah, I love that from your website.
But we also go back to, we still got, we have a pick your own Mac and Cortland thing every year. It's just coming to an end now, but people come in their little carloads of kids and go out and ride the trailer out into the orchard and pick Macs. And, we haven't entirely abandoned the bread and butter New England eating apples. We've just, it's like our back rooms, that when you come to the orchard, you see all these old, lovely Macs and Cortlands. Out in the back, where most of the acres are, we're growing a bunch of stuff that you can't really eat. I mean, most of these good cider apples, if you tried to put them in a kid's lunchbox, you go to family court. I mean, they're not. They are bad to eat. Their only excuse for existence is the character they bring to fermented cider. They're very like wine grapes in that way.
Yeah,
you don't see Cabernet Sauvignon in the supermarket. Whole Foods has not got a Chardonnay aisle except in the wine section. In the same way that you don't see a Thompson Seedless grape section in the wine shops, and we're growing the apple equivalent of vinifera grapes, which are not very good to eat, but do bring a lot of character to fermented cider. And as to the time it takes, apple growing is one step down from forestry. You need to take a long view if you're going to grow trees for a living. And there are various methods of planting the trees that are particularly in favor now of very high-density trellised, supported trees, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 trees to the acre. The trees are planted a few feet from one another. They come into production within a year or so. They're, trickle irrigation and a weed-free strip and permanent tree support. We don't do that. I don't denigrate it. It's a way to grow fruit, and it's supporting a lot of good orchard land. But our somewhat prejudiced view is that the best cider fruit is grown on somewhat larger, deeper-rooted trees. So with our planting approach, which is more like 200 instead of 2,000 trees to the acre, we, it's 4 or 5 years before you see much in the way of any apples, and 8 years before you get a full crop if you've done everything right. But it varies a lot. It varies a lot according to how you're planting the rootstocks, the density of fruit trees and whatever. So I don't know if was that the answer?
Yeah, no, I think you went right through it. I'm impressed. I was like a couple of things filling in there. I loved the line on your website that you guys are the biggest grower of inedible apples in the United States. Kind of a little tongue-in-cheek, but really kind of highlights what is so different about what's happening on your operation there. And I do also find like really the story of, transitioning to the Macintosh Cortland system into something that where you're growing this wide diversity of, I think, what you call uncommon apples.
We do. Yeah. The uncommon apples, that's our brand of what people like to call heirlooms.
Mm-hmm.
Something funny about heirlooms, the thing is Macintosh and Red Delicious are actually older varieties than a lot of the varieties that we sell as heirlooms. It's not really that something's been around for a very long time that distinguishes it in this. What we've been looking for are varieties. Again, we're not talking about cider apples now. We're talking about the stuff that the apples we grow for eating or cooking for the most part. That's what the uncommon thing is to us. And we're looking at varieties that have fallen from commercial favor for one reason or another over the last 100 or 150 years. What we've discovered is, it should be sort of obvious, just being old doesn't make something good. So, we've been looking for the varieties that have fallen from commercial favor for what we now think are stupid reasons. For example, there are a lot of different russeted varieties. They're very different from one another. People say, oh, I love russet apples. It's like saying I love red apples. They're the only characteristic that russets share is that they have brown skin, but that thick brown skin kind of fell out of favor 100 years ago. People were going for, shiny red stuff and thin-skinned apples. And so a lot of really good russet varieties fell by the wayside. Other things with dense flesh, or various apples that were, the whole thing about culinary apples in this country, there are still, in France and England, there's still a category of culinary apples. It doesn't exist in the U.S. Most recipes call for Granny Smiths. Most Granny Smiths are grown in the Southern Hemisphere. Sorry, there are some grown here as well, fair number, but still, the point is, Granny Smith is a sort of all-purpose apple. There are a number of varieties that have lasted generations because they're so brilliant in cooking. You see them in, old French still lifes next to the dead pheasant. Those are the things we've been looking for in growing. So growing with, but we only grow things. We try only to grow varieties that we think we can really grow well. So we have hundreds of varieties of individual branches grafted on trees, but the things that we actually plant are things we think we can really grow to a very, high standard. And we don't really care how old they are. We just care that they're good.
They taste good. Well, I love the kind of like conversation around apples that Cider brings up. It's like an apple is not an apple. It's like all of a sudden this thing that I think anyone of my generation, that you grew up thinking, an apple is kind of this singular thing. Your world gets kind of blown up into like not just all the varieties, but all the usages and all the stories behind those. And one of the things I find so interesting about the work that you guys do is that your business includes so many different parts. Like on one hand, you're managing these orchards and having kind of the agricultural skill set to maintain a healthy land base where you're growing a lot of different things, and it sounds like in a number of different ways. And so there's like that chunk of work, and then the cider making, obviously, which is a whole other kind of skill set and harvesting set, and then the eating apples that fall into a multitude of categories, and then the on farm site visits, pick your own. And then you guys also sell juice into the wholesale market. Is that right?
Yeah.
So
you have described our problem pretty well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So did I miss anything?
We sell juice to people all over, cider makers across the country. The one thing that is, we actually should take off the website that is no longer true, and we're really proud and pleased by this, is we are not any longer the largest acreage of inedible apples in this country.
I got it wrong.
Couple of years, growers are planting them. This has been a great pleasure. We've been giving away budwood, which is the propagation material, trying to encourage growers to grow these weird apples. My first colleagues are really apple growers. That's what we've done all our lives. So, the cider thing, we started maybe 30 years ago, but still, that's kind of really new to us compared to the other thing. And we've been trying to encourage growers to plant this stuff for a long time. And, every year we give away a few hundred buds, meaning of the propagation material for a few hundred trees. This year it was over 50,000 real, serious commercial growers across the country are putting these apples in the ground. What that means is that within the next decade, the quality of cider in this country is going to shoot up. And right now we have a market for fruit and juice across the country because we are the only game in town almost. But the great pleasure in this is that, I hope we will be able to use all of our own fruit soon, that the whole market starts to grow to that extent, and that meanwhile, real regional distinctions between ciders start to develop. Right now, there are a lot of claimed regional distinctions about ciders, but they really have nothing to do with the land. It's not akin to wine regions because, if somebody develops the Iowa style of cider, it has to do with, this is not Iowa I picked out of the hat, but, it has to do with jalapeno flavoring or something, or Johnny Gold's off the packing line. When people start actually deliberately growing apples for cider, and, what makes a cider apple, I've got my own prejudices about what makes a good cider apple, but, my general view about what constitutes a cider apple, it's an apple that somebody actually grows on purpose to make cider with. Mm-hmm. It grows, so in the same way that I don't love every good wine in the world, I'm not going to love every cider either, and neither are you.
Right.
But it's really the sort of horticultural on-purpose element that's coming now, and that's going to be very cool. And there are a lot more of these varieties, including some. Virginia's a great example. They've got their own bittersweet varieties. We can't grow a lot of their cider apples for spit up here in New Hampshire. But they can't grow most of the stuff that we grow. Well, in New Hampshire and Virginia, though, therein lies a regional difference that's really real. It has to do with the fruit that can be grown well in those places. This is going to start to emerge. Michigan is planting stuff. Vermont's planting, and New York is planting stuff. Oregon and Washington are planting stuff. There are going to be real cider regions soon. That is a huge satisfaction to us.
Yeah, no, that's really exciting.
We are the source of a lot of the propagation material, but, what are you going to do? We were the Looney Tunes who sort of started growing this stuff years ago. But you're reminding me that I should tell folks to get that off the website because it ain't true anymore, thank God.
Well, Steve, I want you to hang tight. We are going to take a short break, and when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about what cider is doing for land at your farm and across the country. So hold tight, folks. You're listening to The Farm Report, and we'll be right back.
You are listening to Bad Mama Jama by Alan Wilkes. Since 2001, Heritage Foods USA has sold pasture-raised, antibiotic-free heritage meats to restaurants and homes around the country. Our farmers raise their animals with care using traditional methods, guaranteed to produce the very best-tasting meat. Our pork breeds include Berkshire, Red Wattle, Duroc, Gloucester Old Spot, Large Black, and Tamworth, and our beef comes from Piedmontese, Angus Akiyushi, Belgian Blue, Highland, Simmental, and Belted Galloway cattle. We also carry a rotation of 24 rare breeds of heritage chicken, seasonal specialties like lamb, goat, geese, and of course, heritage turkeys. Visit us online at www.heritagefoodsusa.com or give us a call at 718-389-0985 to place your order today.
We are students at Girls Prep
right, we are back. We're on the line with Steve Wood of Poverty Lane Orchards and Farnum Hill Cider. Steve, what I'm hoping we can talk a little bit here in the second half of the show is what cider does for the land. I'm curious, when we're thinking about agriculture production, not so much in like what we get to eat and enjoy or drink and enjoy, but how does this kind of growth of interest and this transition or new growth of trees, how is that in fact impacting kind of the landscape in counties where, in areas where cider is being grown? And also, what is kind of the impacts on our ag land from cider, if it's distinctive in some way from other forms of agriculture?
Well, this is the question that's closest to our heart. A lot of the answer to your question, I mean, there are two answers. One is what it's doing right now, but the really fundamental question is what it will or can do. And what it's done so far is to provide another market for reject apples. So it's helping to keep, at the moment, it's helping to keep a lot of orchard areas of the country and orchard land, therefore, agricultural in production. What we think and what we see other growers finally embracing is the notion that, cider apples are valuable. It's a valuable crop to plant. What that does is to allow, it just opens up a whole other kind of realm of fruit production possibilities for growers and a lot of wholesale fruit growing. I mean, there's a reason that we stopped growing, packing, shipping, exporting, maxing Portland's 20 years ago. It's difficult now, and particularly difficult on not marginal land, but the land like ours that used to make its money on the quality of the fruit it grew and not the quantity. Where what really in a nutshell happened to us was we never made money on production efficiency. We made money on the premium we could get for really good Macintosh. That has, in effect, disappeared. Really good means uniform large. I mean, you go to Whole Foods even. Look, they're supposedly the big green guys, and we like Whole Foods, but look at the apple displays. All the apples of all the varieties are the same size in these vertical trapezoidal stacks. That is the condition you've got to meet to grow profitable apples in this country now. Cider's a whole other story. You're growing apples for what's in them. And so places that are very good at growing one sort of apple or another can actually possibly start making real money growing apples for what's in them. And if you consider wine, and wine is kind of really, wine grapes are kind of our model and have been for years. Wine grapes are the only agricultural crop I know where subtle differences between similar things are not only not penalized, but are actually rewarded, paid for. Nobody expects think about Bordeaux grapes, Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, and Merlot. Those grapes grown in Bordeaux are what started the whole thing. But nobody expects the stuff grown in Southwest Australia or Napa Valley or Long Island, those made from one or another or all of those grapes, to smell, taste, or feel the same. And they pay for the difference. Cider is such a thing. Meanwhile, again, go into any supermarket and look at the requirement for uniformity. You are penalized for not being able to meet a bunch of standards that have nothing to do with the actual, whatever you want to call it, organoleptic pleasure you can get from the thing that you buy. They're all, they're grown to be big and shiny and the same size. I'm not pretending that there's nothing else in that. I mean, Honeycrisp, they're cool for what they are, whatever. But the point is, wine grapes are a whole nother, it's another realm, and cider apples are in that realm. And good growers who understand their land have an opportunity with this developing cider industry to grow fruit that will, first of all, distinguish their farms, but also that it's stabler. There's no, They've been growing Pinot Noir in the Northern Rhone for a very long time, right? Since it was it started by Cistercian monks in the 12th century. This stuff, the market's not as fickle. So I think it's a huge, prospect for really the preservation of good apple ground that can't really make it in the current market conditions for fresh fruit. So it's really a very hopeful thing, and it's one of the reasons we've been so. This is one of the things that drives us. In truth, I mean, we're not a museum. We are actually a business, but it's quite exciting to have had some hand in kicking forward this what I think is a really good prospect for good apple ground in this country.
I think too. It sounds like in a way this kind of, I would say, almost radical taking back of a power shift, essentially. Like as the kind of power in the apple market grew to be more consolidated and outsourced, beyond the borders of the U.S. or segmented in different areas of the U.S., the things that are rewarded, which you talk about, the uniformity and the production and the volume, you're losing in that all of the kind of like nuance and essentially like it's exciting to me, this idea of like finding delight in the unique, in the place-based.
There's a variety. It's just that thing about variety being the spice of life is, man, that's true, right?
Yeah.
And, one of the things about all this stuff, it's not power exact. I mean, the thing is, we are all complicit in this. It's us. It's what we demand. People say they want one thing, but actually they want another. They do want uniformity. They want to feel that they're doing something good, so they don't really examine very hard. I mean, people think that if they separate their green glass from their aluminum and drive a Prius and buy organic, they can say that they're not complicit in the ills of the world. So people want absolution on the one hand. On the other hand, they want to think that they're doing something that's really kind of special, but they actually want. Most of the first world wants the same thing. We do actually crave uniformity. The great thing, this is not very encouraging to think or say. That's what I think.
I'm like, keep going, man. Keep going.
Happily, what's happening is that a lot of folks are getting dissatisfied with that. This is all still in a way kind of a niche market. Our hope is that these things become more and more. I'm not now just talking about cider apples. They become more mainstream, and that does seem to be happening in this country. It's enough. There's enough market for all kinds of cool, different things. That people are actually enough people are embracing the different. Mm-hmm. And the sort of fun on the edges of uniformity. that things really are in a way slightly changing. But with this goes, there's a great deal of affectation out there, and in cider as well. I mean, we've got a sort of slight cluster of people that we're sort of calling ourselves the fine cider people or the grower cider people or something who are really orchard-based ciders. And scattered across the country, but who are making what each of us thinks. We like each other's cider. We admire each other's cider. And one of the things that is driving us crazy is the whole so-called artisanal deal. I mean, people have got this notion in their minds that if it's made by some small producer who is a self-declared artist, it must be delicious. Well, what we're trying to say to people is, look, just taste it. If it's not delicious, it's not delicious.
Right.
And a very large producer can make something really delicious, and a really small producer can make something really disgusting. And the real shakeout is going to be the happy day is going to be when good stuff is honored, because that is, again, that will track the land, that will provide stability. So we're working in the context of a lot of sometimes useful to us marketing affectation. I mean, shoot, our labels say all kinds of stuff about traditional. I don't know. Traditional is another one of those funny words. What the heck is that? I mean, artisanal, traditional, it's great. It's a great marketing term, but I don't know what it means. And sometimes it's on, it's on some pretty skanky stuff. But it's all, I mean, it is good. This is all a very good, it's very hopeful. But I do want to keep reminding people that we are all responsible for the other stuff. It's not some like evil external force that's come in and
Sure.
It's not Walmart is not the problem. It's that we want Walmart. That's the problem.
That's the instinct that we should be questioning. Well, it reminds me of something you said earlier in the program where you're like, Golden Delicious, Red Delicious are older than a lot of these the varieties that you're promoting and through the Uncommon Apples line, that age is not a signifier of like a quality and like what it feels like in your mouth, in the same way that small or large are not a signifier of what's happening in your palate. I want to ask, we just have a few minutes left here, but I'm curious, because you are active in both kind of the eating world with the apples and then the drinking world with the cider, do you find that folks are more or less adventurous in one of these areas versus the other? I mean, 'cause I think in particular about the beverage space, thinking about, wine and the cocktail culture and the explosion of craft breweries, it seems to me like there's a large appetite and an embracing of variety and difference and time and place and space. And I'm wondering, is that happening in the eating space in the same way? Or I don't know. It's kind of a funny question, but because you kind of are looking at both.
It's a very good question. And it does, actually, if we had to drop something, and we might have to drop something, it would be the apples. The eating apples, the cooking apples, for the exact reason. It's just what I said about Whole Foods, this is not an indictment of Whole Foods. It's very difficult to get eating apples or cooking apples into a place where people can even buy them unless you go to food service or whatever. And people are not as adventurous. They say they're going to be adventurous. They say, they say they want to buy environmentally sound, things grown, to a standard of environmental sensibility and sensibility to fairness to workers and whatever, but they also want perfectly squeaky clean fruit. They don't want to, they say they'll take blemishes. Try to produce some apples with blemishes and put them out there and see how fast they move. They don't move. So except in the occasional farmer's market, and that's cool, Union Square is cool and all that stuff. But cider, just what I said about wine grapes, cider, I think if it carries on, it is, first of all, as people are finally getting it. And once they start to get it, the range of aromas and flavors that can come from an apple in whatever form is enormous. In cider, cider strikes me as a stabler market. People appear to be braver about what they don't have to chew, what they drink. New York is actually, New York and Chicago, there are a few places that are extraordinary in that way. But yeah, if I had to pick one, I'd pick cider as a place for people to continue to, stretch the edges of their notion of pleasure.
Yeah.
We don't want to drop either one,
right?
But, I think cider's the place.
Yeah, and it's like what you, as a consumer, what you see of the process, because I think, right. There is this. I think it is reflective too of our removal from food production. That in a way, cider comes in a glass bottle that we open, and even if it's a different color than we're expecting, or has enough of there's different ways that it can be unexpected, but it's
Absolutely
clean
right.
and controlled and packaged, and in some ways more digestible than
right.
and familiar than a knotty apple with a tougher skin. Right. And so it's a work in progress.
There's more prospect for it actually being, because of the wine deal. There is a subset of cider. I don't denigrate flavored ciders or what. I don't denigrate wine coolers. I don't drink wine coolers, but the heck, people want to drink them. Somebody wants to make them. Perfect. Strawberry, daiquiri flavored wine cooler. Great, make it. Same thing with cider. There's all kinds of cider that I don't want to drink, but is doing anybody any harm. But the subset of real cider, which is based on land and based on fruit, as that grows, the range of pleasures from the actual crops of apples and the ground that grows them is going to expand. And that to me, that looks just like a stabler bet. And the other stuff's going to keep going, the stuff made indifferently of whatever kind of apples or whatever kind of concentrate with jalapeno or whatever else thrown into it, or maple syrup or all-natural honey or whatever damn thing. That there is a cider, sort of slash Chateauneuf de Pop thing going here now that might actually we hope it will become entrenched in people's minds. What we hope is that a regular person who's actually a good prospective host who keeps a bottle of red and a bottle of white and a few bottles of beer kicking around the house in case somebody drops by will also have a bottle of real cider in the house. In case that's what we're aiming for. Make it another staple of pleasure.
Awesome.
Does that make sense?
No, that totally makes sense. Steve, we are sadly out of time, but thank you so much for joining us today. It was really a pleasure to chat with you.
Well, thank you for your patience with the long string of agricultural polemic.
That is exactly what I'm looking for on the Farm Report. So,
okay,
all right.
Well,
so,
thanks very much.
Thank you, folks. If you're interested in learning more about Poverty Lane Orchards or more about Farnum Hill Cider, you can definitely find them at www.povertylane.com. If you are in New York, check them out this coming Friday, Halloween. They'll be over at Frankly Wines at 66 West Broadway from 5:30 to 7:30, doing a farm-made cider, the Farnum Hill Cider tasting. So great event there. Thanks so much for tuning in. This has been another episode of the Farm Report. This show, like all 39 of our weekly programs, is available for free. You can find us by visiting www.heritageradionetwork.org. We're also available as a podcast via iTunes or Stitcher Smart Radio. Stay tuned. Up next, we got Pizza Party with Talia Ralph. She's making faces at me in the studio. Yeah, all the greatest tips on your best pizza costume ever. Sounds saucy if you ask me. Thanks again for listening, and stay tuned in.
Thanks for listening to this program on heritageradionetwork.org. You can find all of our archive programs on our website or as podcasts in the iTunes store by searching Heritage Radio Network. You can like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at @heritage_radio. You can email us questions anytime at info@heritageradionetwork.org. Heritage Radio Network is a 501c3 non-profit. To donate and become a member, visit our website today. Thanks for listening.
Hey listeners, we're nearing the end of our 15th anniversary fundraising campaign, and we need your help to meet our goal. This campaign offers you a chance to win a unique food and music experience in one of the most exciting cities in America. Here's how it works. Donate to HRN and you'll be entered to win dinner for two and 2 tickets to a concert in one of 8 amazing cities: New York, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Nashville, Las Vegas, Charleston, Ardmore, Pennsylvania, and Asheville. All donations support our work educating food system storytellers. And when you donate, you can choose one of those cities and you'll be entered to win dinner and 2 tickets to a show. So help us reach our goal and enter to win dinner and a show in the city of your choice. Check out heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. That's heritageradionetwork.org/15. Thank you.